So, what is really going on between the United States and Iran? It feels like one day we're hearing about peace, and the very next we're hearing threats of total destruction. It's incredibly confusing, right? The tension is high, and the stakes, well, they couldn't be higher. So, in this explainer, we're going to cut through all that noise and decode what's actually happening behind the scenes.
Okay, let's just dive right into the heart of the confusion. On the one hand, you have President Trump saying, I achieved peace. But then you have him also threatening the total destruction of Iran. How do you even square those two statements? I mean, are they part of some brilliant, coherent strategy, or is it just chaos?
And that really brings us to the big question we're trying to answer here. Behind all the headlines and these totally conflicting messages, what is really going on? Well, believe it or not, there's an official textbook name for this kind of approach. It's something called coercive diplomacy.
Think of coercive diplomacy as the ultimate high-stakes negotiation tactic. The message is simple and it's pretty brutal. You're going to agree to my terms or I am going to escalate the pressure. It's an attempt to force the outcome you want by making the alternative seem so much worse. But here's the thing. There's one massive problem with trying to use this strategy here. It is completely backfiring. Iran isn't surrendering. Not at all. Instead of caving, they're pushing back, resisting, and in some cases even escalating things on their own terms. The fact that this strategy is failing so badly, well, it points to a much deeper issue. This isn't just about a bad game plan. It's about a complete and total breakdown of trust between these two countries. You can actually see this vicious cycle play out again and again. It goes something like this. Iran agrees to come to the table and talk. Then the US issues new threats or attacks. And no surprise, trust is just shattered, and the talks collapse. This isn't a one-time thing. It's a destructive pattern that keeps repeating. And here's the bottom line. Without any foundation of trust, a real, lasting peace deal is basically impossible. This lack of trust has become the real obstacle, bigger than any single policy disagreement. You just can't build anything that lasts on such shaky ground. Now, you might be sitting there thinking, okay, but why does this standoff halfway around the world actually matter to me? The answer comes down to a critical economic choke point that affects literally the entire global economy. Let's talk about the Strait of Hormuz. This isn't just some random waterway, it's a global lifeline. A huge chunk of the world's oil supply has to pass through this tiny little passage. If it gets blocked or if ships start getting attacked, well, you can imagine. The global oil supply could grind to a halt, prices would skyrocket, and the shockwaves would ripple through every economy on the planet. The threat is very, very real.
But what if there's even more going on? What if this isn't just about diplomacy and military threats? Let's peel back one more layer, because there might be a hidden economic game playing out in the shadows. When you look at the key players here, it's clear everyone is in a tough spot. The US wants Iran to submit, but its credibility is taking a hit. Iran is trying to hold on to its sovereignty and is defiant, even with all the pressure. Then you've got players like Pakistan trying to mediate, and Israel with its own security concerns, all trying to influence a game they can't really control. And this is where a really fascinating and kind of cynical idea comes into play. What if the confusing messages aren't a mistake? What if they're a deliberate strategy to manipulate financial markets? Just think about it for a second. Every time a new threat is made, oil prices jump. Every time peace is mentioned, they fall back down. So what you're really looking at here is a combination of two things. Classic power politics, one country trying to dominate another, fused with a new kind of economic warfare, where market volatility itself becomes a weapon. All right, let's cut through all the diplomatic speak and the complex analysis for a second and get to the core of what's happening. This is the brutal reality that a lot of news reports won't spell out for you. When you strip everything else away, what this really is a raw game of power, control, and who gets to dominate the narrative. The ultimate goal isn't necessarily a signed peace treaty, it's about establishing who's in charge and who gets to make the rules. And that's what makes this quote so perfect. It really captures the mindset. In this kind of power struggle, peace talks aren't always the end goal. Sometimes they're just a tactic, a strategic pause, a moment to regroup and plan the next move in a much bigger game. So with all this going on, how are you supposed to make sense of the headlines you'll see tomorrow or next week? How do you understand the game? Well, here are a few key things to keep in mind. Here are 4 rules for watching this all unfold. First, watch what they do, not what they say.
The contradictory statements are mostly noise. Troop movements and sanctions, that's the real signal. Second, remember that when trust is completely gone, any agreement you see is probably fragile and temporary at best. Third, economic choke points, like the Strait of Hormuz, that's where the real power lies. And finally, number 4, never forget that mixed messaging might not be confusion, it can be a weapon.
And all of this leaves us with one final, pretty heavy question to think about. When nations are locked in a high-stakes game for power, for control, and for dominance, is true, lasting peace ever really the ultimate goal? Or is it just another move on the board?